Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all you members of the TSB Nation. I'm Rustin Edwards, currently in Geneva with our reddened lobsterman colleague, Matt Stanley, traveling the world, increasing that jet demand, making
Yeah,
all those oil bulls happy.
I'm increasing jet fuel demand, making Sir Tim happy, contributing to Dubai's tourism. Um, I'm currently in Prague. It's 1 degree. It was -4 this morning, -5.
Toasty,
Um,
1 degrees.
yeah, look, it's Central Europe in January. Why not have a sales meeting in middle of January in Central Europe when it's nice and warm? Don't want to be on the Med. I want to be in Central Europe.
Well, it's nice
First
and
world
warm in
problem.
the pubs. I'm sure that's for sure.
Yes, yes, no, it's a beautiful place. We've got 3 days worth of meetings for the European teams. I was in Asia last week for the Asian side, the States next week for the States side. But no, all good. Yeah, all good. A bit red. It was my parents. They were over at seeing us, so it was their 50th wedding anniversary celebrations, which we did at the weekend. And then yeah, jumped on a plane Monday morning.
Well, we've got markets today. We got crude oil pretty much unchanged on the day at 82.45 for Brent, 76.92 for WTI, and we got ICE gas oil down on the day at $849 a ton.
Yeah,
Markets have been on a relatively supported side, basically all on the back of geopolitical supply risk.
yeah,
We've had the multiple strikes of Ukrainian drones attacking different Russian infrastructure for the last week and a half, especially over the weekend with hits in Ust-Luga, Tolapsi, Yaroslavl in the east. And then, of course, the incident that happened over the weekend with Marlon Luando being hit by a missile, causing a fire on board of a LR2 with naphtha.
yeah, yeah. Look, it's been a very active week. We spoke about the issues last week in the Red Sea, Bab el Mandeb. People transiting, like you said, the Marlin Luanda, the traffic cargo, carrying a cargo of Russian naphtha, um,
Under the price cap.
under the price cap. Yeah, exactly. That is a very valid point because, there are people who are looking at it going, well, you can't do that because it's Russian. Well, you can. As long as the cargo is not imported into the EU and you've got all the documentation, you buy it under the price cap, and it's nominated accordingly, no problem at all.
Yep.
Yeah, that's that people need to understand that, and I'm not being patronizing there. And it has been fairly ambiguous if you're not within the inner circles and confines of the oil trading market. But where it sits morally, discuss. That's for everyone to have their opinion, but it can still freely tradable and movable, and Traffic did nothing wrong. So, of course, it's being targeted. I just want to give you some figures based on, because people are saying, well, what does it all mean? How much have things been affected? How much will things been affected? You just mentioned about ICE gas oil trading, what, $845 a ton. Gas oil cracks have rallied 20% in the last week or so. So people are concerned about, and Clyde Russell, our good mate over at Reuters, read his read his weekly columns, they're excellent. But the one, his article this week isn't about the issues regarding crude, it's about refined products, especially diesel, whether that's supply
Look,
east or supply west.
well, the thing is that it's not that there is no supply because no refinery has been impacted.
Yeah,
It's the matter of the fact that the lead time of supply has gotten longer by about 15 to 18 days, depending on where your ship is coming from and how fast you're transiting around the Horn of Africa.
yeah,
Uh, so it's not at some point there will be a rebalancing that will happen, and that will happen probably in the near future as these incidents started in December. Here we are now at the end of January. And as we saw with the embargo against Russian oil into Europe, and when all that started kicking off, and then against the products, it takes around 6 to 8 weeks for the trade flows to rebalance, and everything kind of normalizes back to a balanced system once again. And
yeah,
so we're just about at that point where we should start seeing that rebalancing finish up. And so what does that mean? That means for your clean product tankers, longer ton miles, which means higher freight rates.
yeah,
It doesn't really impact crude oil tankers as much, just because a lot of crude oil went around Africa anyway on a loaded passage, and maybe went through the Red Sea on a ballast passage, but most of your crude was going around Africa anyway, so it's a very minimal impact at all, except for maybe the localized barrels that load in the Red Sea, like your Dar blend and what have you. Uh,
yeah.
Nile
I
went.
mean, yeah, I mean, look, and your favorite energy podcast, The Smoking Barrel, covered this days after the strike started to escalate in early December. We said the same thing. But as always, when the news filters down to the end user, when the news value is there about, when that lead time is actually felt, is about now. So of course these stories are coming out, and it's
Well,
no.
and I think actually the recent spike in gas oil, a lot of it did happen over Friday and Monday when the news of the Marlo Luanda being hit, and people thought, oh my God, this is a huge escalation. Oh my God, they actually hit a tanker. And so you do have that emotional response that happens to a market, which looks like that emotional response is cooling off as people are starting to realize that, okay, all that means is people are going to avoid it.
Yeah.
And once enough ships avoid it, basically the Houthis run out of targets because there's nothing to shoot at.
Well, I'm just reading, so there's a couple of things, and I just let me just start on the just going back to that gas one. There was an issue at Pernis as well, the refinery, Shell's
Yes.
refinery. So and E&I, they had some issues. But
Oh,
yeah,
no,
just going,
and there's been refinery issues in the United States. You had Exxon Bayway,
yeah,
Exxon Baytown. You've had issues with Marathon, with Flint Hills refining,
yeah,
all the U.S. Gulf Coast, all basically weather-related issues with the massive cold spike that hit the United States. And if you saw the EIA data last week, U.S. refinery utilization dropped to 87%, which normally this time of year it's around 92%. So there's a big
yeah,
drop off in utilization rate and an impact to crude production because of this Arctic blast that hit the area.
yeah.
But for the most part, I think a lot of the refinery runs in the US have recovered. And so that's a net positive. I think crude oil is still recovering. I think last I was reading, there's about 250,000 barrels a day of production that's still offline because of the impacts of the cold weather, but that should be recovered sometime here this week. So we should be back to 13.2, 13.3 million barrels in the US, if not by this week, by next week.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I just want to give you some of the figures about, what's happening in the Red Sea, the change in what. So the main metric I just want to highlight is the change in Suez Canal transits from November last year to January this year.
Down what, about
Across the
40,
whole.
down below more than 40% from what I've been reading.
Well, yeah. Well, total's down 30%, right? So LNG is the worst hit and transits down 73%, dry bulk 27, tankers just 23%, and LPG 65%. And it seems like the momentum is only increasing in terms of the change in transits. What has it meant for prices? Bunker prices in Singapore, regardless of other market factors, we're just using the same metrics. This is the percent change since the 15th of December. VLSFO refining margins are up 43%. Singapore bunker prices, VLSFO, are up 14%, 662 a ton roughly. Northwest Europe jet, the refining margin there is up 10%. And then pretty much, I mean, diesel a little bit, up 8%, but naphtha down, corn down, wheat down, soybeans down, natural gas, DTF, Dutch natural gas futures, down 16% on the same. So look, it's just about putting things into context, isn't it? And it's terrible what's going on, for the well-being of seafarers and making sure that they're going to transit. At 30%, who is the worst hit there? You'd argue Egyptian's GDP. It's
Yes.
GDP because we've used this argument before, and I think that you will start seeing. I don't know. This is the irony. Do the Suez Canal authorities start incentivizing for people to go through the
Well,
canal?
they've already tried to cut rates to
Really?
incentivize people to go through. But now you actually, and it's a bit of a, if you want to run the gauntlet, how much do you think you're going to avoid being hit because of what you've put on your AIS from your vessel and what you're reporting to the authorities versus what the reality is? I mean, so, I still think that a lot of, if you're loading Russian originated oil out of the Black Sea heading into the Asian market, you're probably going to pass through without much of an issue. And so I think that flow still remains.
Right.
The issue with the Trafigura ship is it was a UK owned vessel. UK ownership, UK operation. Trafigura is a Western company, therefore it's on the target list.
Yeah, but I don't think no one can judge or wants to get into the mind of what these Neanderthals are doing, attacking ships but I don't think Traffy were targeted. I think you're right. I think it's UK,
It's
US
a
based
UK
assets.
owned vessel, UK owned vessel. And so, I mean, I think that's where, you know, you're going to see a secondary high grade in the market, if you want to call it that, where anything that's EU owned and US owned is just going to avoid the Red Sea. And you're going to end
Yeah.
up with, you know, a lot of your East Asian owned ships transiting without a problem. So, but it's still a hit in revenue for the Egyptian government. No, don't get me wrong, it's a massive hit, not only for the canal transits, but also for the Isthmus pipeline,
Yeah.
because a fair amount of crude loading from Ain Sukna going up to Alexandria
Yeah.
is not flowing.
What are you seeing on the, being in the shipping community as you are, obviously? What has freight done? The Suezmaxes, the VLCCs, have they
Well,
moved?
it's been a boy. The VLCCs have been relatively unaffected by this because again, it wasn't a VLCC route.
Yeah, of course.
The Suezmaxes, again, there's been a slight impact to the Suezmaxes, but there's been a few other things that have happened in the Suezmax market that are kind of offsetting what's going on with the Red Sea. So, you know, there has been the startup of the Dangote refinery in West Africa, the
Yeah.
startup of the Soweto refinery in Ghana. I mean, those two big events, all of a sudden now you're losing 400,000 barrels a day of crude oil exports out of West Africa, which impacts, you know, a half a Suezmax every day.
Yeah.
So right there, you've reduced the need to lift out of the West African market, but you've also have a longer ton mile, so it's kind of a neutral position. Therefore, freight rates have been kind of flat more than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be, unfortunately, cross Red Sea transits will be very expensive. Cross Med will be very expensive because people
Well,
aren't going to be positioned there, are they?
well, cross Med, you know, you still have demand for refineries in the Mediterranean, right? You have Italy, you have Trieste, you've got you know, the ESOB on Sicily, and you've got
Yeah.
Cepsa, Repsol, all those counterparties in the Red Sea. So what happens? Crude markets readjust. So you end up with CPC crude probably staying in the Med, doesn't go exported anywhere else. You've got West African, Brazilian, Libyan, Algerian crude oil staying in the Med, supplying all those refineries.
Right.
So net, all that works, and your material that comes from the Middle East stays east of Suez, doesn't come through.
If only we had a way to check if flows in commodities have been affected. If only there was a way.
If only there was a way, if only there was a platform out there that had that data that you could
Oi.
buy and subscribe to.
Let me have a look. Med region crude condensate imports. Not a lot.
Now, the other thing that's actually also impacting Suezmax and Aframax is the fact that the sanctions on Venezuela might be snapping back into place because the Maduro government has banned the competition from running in the presidential election.
Right.
And so there you have that expected crude flow not happening now out of Venezuela, potentially not happening out of Venezuela. So therefore, that just increases the availability of freight in the Atlantic Basin, which kind of puts pressure on the whole Suezmax, Aframax market.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Because I mean, there's so many things to look at here. Geez, Israeli imports obviously down. Or exports, sorry, are down. Yeah, I mean that's get in touch with your friendly neighborhood Keplerian because there's so much to dive into there. But Venezuela is a good one because I've had a few questions on that. Just stick on that for a minute because what's your opinion there, being American as you are, being American, the Venezuelan lifting of sanctions, more a political move from Biden or
But
there's a longer play?
the sanctions in Venezuela are always a political move because again, it's a case of how much impact does Venezuela have on the U.S. crude slate? It has a very large impact because that's the main export market for the barrel next to Asia because the U.S. refineries are set up to run heavy sour crudes.
Yeah.
So it's a very natural outlet. So putting those sanctions back in place are actually negative for U.S. Refining because it increases the price of heavy sour crudes that come in. Now, if you look at the whole spectrum of heavy sour crude supply into the U.S. Gulf Coast, you've got the startup of the TMX pipeline out to the west coast of the United States or west coast of North America, which is going to move 300 to 400,000 barrels a day of Canadian heavy sour directly west, not
Yeah.
south. So you reduce supply of heavy sour crudes there. You've got the Dos Bocas refinery in Mexico starting up, 300,000 barrels a day of local crude being consumed at a new refinery. Plus the other refinery upgrade programs in Mexico, so reducing exports out of Pemex. So net, you end up with a tighter heavy sour market in the U.S. Gulf Coast if sanctions are put on Venezuela and tighten back down.
Right. Okay. I'm just looking at the numbers here because it's if I just go to the last 1 year, Venezuelan exports been largely averaged around, let's see, 520,000 barrels last per day. February is looking at 706. Who's buying it? The States, 80,000 barrels a day. China, 60. India, 130. That's quite impressive, that growth. That's all Meray crudes, so all feeds. I wonder if they're cheaper than Russian. Another one to get in touch with us about or just have a look at. Malaysia, that would be outside port limits. That's all high sulfur fuel oil. But there are a couple of cargoes going into Europe, which is
Yes.
unusual.
Well, Cepsa and Repsol both have offtake agreements to take Venezuelan crude, so it's not as unusual as you think. I mean, the Mediterranean refinery Tarragona runs a lot of was designed for heavy sour crudes, therefore it has a nice outlet to bring that in.
Sorry, say that again. Who's got an agreement? Cepsa and Repsol.
Repsol.
Okay, I haven't seen that. That's interesting. We've got a couple of methanol cargoes going in into Rotterdam. Okay. No, look, I mean, this one we just keep an eye on. Yes, quite a lot of has been going into Vopak terminal in Botlek, 180,000 barrels of methanol.
So here's
Yeah.
a question then, based on, let's talking crude flows and where they're going.
Yeah.
There was a story out in Reuters that there were about 10 crude ships loaded with so-called crude oil in Asia with nowhere to go.
Oh, God damn you, so-called crude.
And
Let me have a look.
it's all tied back to, if there was a story a few weeks ago that India was having payment issues buying Russian crude, and so cargoes were being turned away from India.
That's very interesting. Yes. Yes. So if you go back, let's go back a year, January last year, 150,000 barrels a day of so-called crude imported by two people. Guess who?
HPL and BPL?
No, two countries. Sorry, excuse me.
Oh, India and China.
Gold Star. If you go to, so that's January this year, 172,000 barrels. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Rosneft cargoes with no destination right now. So that's true. So well, apparently, let's not take anything gospel when what Matt Stanley said this. There's obviously legs to that story. If so-called based on the last 12 months has only been going to China and India, there is clearly a problem. They've needed it. It's been consistently buying it. So it's not like suddenly they don't need the slate. There must be some kind of administrative problem, I would guess.
Well, you would think. I mean, if you think about what's happening right now, we have high flat price environment, so there's not a lot of buying. It's a light sweet crude, which makes more gasoline, and it looks like the gasoline market is well awash.
Yeah.
With when you look at statistics in the United States, I mean, gasoline stocks have been building. Demand has been down. Yet even with the big refinery cut we had in the United States last week, we still built 4.9 million barrels of gasoline stocks in the United States.
Right.
So it is saying that maybe it's a crude that's not needed by the Chinese, and that's why they're not looking at it because it's expensive and it doesn't make what they want. So therefore, it kind of sits idle with nowhere to go. So who knows? Who can say? I mean, if you look at the Chinese economy, it's not doing so hot. Yes, they hit their annual GDP number as expected.
Yeah.
No loss there. Evergrande going into liquidation. So
Yeah.
that story has finally come
They've
from.
got $300 billion worth of liabilities.
Yes.
Why is that not a needle mover? I don't get it. I don't know.
Because I think the world's too tied up in the whole geopolitical risk.
Yeah, look, I mean, just on the US, just for a minute, highly resilient economy. Um, People seem to be reacting on crude a bit more now to tensions, I would argue. But in terms of crude, US crude specifically, excuse me, Dangote just bought 2 cargoes of WTI. Trafi sold them 2 cargoes. That goes to show you just how much things have moved in how competitive WTI prices are now into, well, West Africa crude imports are fairly new. Arguably Ghana used to buy a little bit. We'll start buying again. And the feed for the Dangote refinery will be majority Nigerian. But it goes to show you how diversified the pool can be that Dangote are going to run and how competitive US crudes are now across the pond.
Well, it's also a case, I think, with Dangote, it's what is he getting from the WTI grades that he doesn't get from the local grades. And I think with
Yeah,
the higher gasoline authentic yield, and he's trying to get his premium motor spirit production up and running, he
yeah,
probably needs the lighter sweet crudes in to help feather out his refinery. Because remember, his refinery is a single train refinery. It's not a multi-train unit like a lot of
yeah,
modern refineries are. So it's a big monster, one-way pathway from atmospheric unit to tertiary processing units.
yeah,
When you have that, you do need to understand your crude balance and what crude you're buying to get what molecules you need to run your secondary and tertiary units to produce the final goods that you need to sell in the local market and export out as well. So it
yeah.
could be a function that he needs the gasoline richness of WTI in order to make bring his PMS operation up and running.
Yeah, I think as well. I mean, there's rumors. Yesterday, I was hearing that end March they'll have their first gasoline cargoes ready to export or for domestic consumption. So I don't know. Maybe he's looking at like you said, what kind of blend feeds work well. Does it work better in the real world rather than on paper and on some kind of spreadsheet? Running TI, running a blend of Forcados or Agbami, or I don't know. Well, it's a all I know is that the world is watching,
Yeah,
and
well, I mean, and if you think about it, it is going to be a case of how much WTI does he blend in with his local Nigerian crudes to make the right cocktail mix, which goes in to maximize the gasoline, distillate, and jet yield that the country needs.
yeah,
So it is a blending game.
yeah, it really is, and it's a very interesting story. But yeah, just on the rather than Dangote, the competitiveness now of US crudes is a bit of a game changer as well because it had to. They went into the daily pool last year. It had to become, and it is a very efficient machine, the US Gulf Coast. In terms of loading crudes, apart from when it gets a bit windy in late August, or now when it gets frozen over. That's Greta Thunberg's spell worked. She's like Elsa. Um, but yeah, no, it's good. I mean, US GDP. I mean, it seems to be, I would argue, in the last couple of weeks or so, less focus on macro sentiment and more on what's happening, not on interest rates, because people are kind of think maybe we're coming to the end of the cycle in the summer. But it seems to be the real focus right now across every news outlet, regardless of just in the energy space, is what's happening in the Red Sea. You just can't get away from it.
No, you can't. I mean, and that is taking the notion of a lot of the attention from people in the market because that is the hot spot. I mean, that could escalate into something bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, we had the strike on the U.S. base in Jordan.
Yeah,
So how much more? And everybody's waiting on what the response from the Biden administration is going to be because of that, and how are they going to respond? Who knows? That's a wild card currently in play. I mean, when you look at it from a macroeconomic side of the coin, yeah, the U.S. market, U.S. economy is doing quite well in comparison to other economies around the world. It has good GDP growth. The labor market is still relatively robust, and so you don't see a lot, at least from what I can tell. I don't expect to see a very high increase in unemployment in the United States.
yeah,
We've got the Federal Open Market Committee meeting starting today, and they'll have the rate announcement on Wednesday. And I think the market's basically pricing in zero change to interest rates for the time being. There's going to be a lot of people analyzing the memo statement after the announcement on the rate cuts to see what type of forward guidance. And then, of course, you have the press conference with Powell at around 8:30 Central European time where he will discuss the rationale or the thought process that the FMOC went through in deciding and putting their memo out.
Yeah.
I'm of the camp that because the robustness of the U.S. economy and how things are looking, there should be zero change to interest rates in the U.S. for this entire year. I
Well,
can't make an argument for a rate cut. The market, the economy is not slowing down. Yes, the PMI numbers are still tragically low, but GDP growth looks okay. Unemployment looks okay.
yeah.
There's nothing to me that says that screams, "Oh my God, we have to cut rates." Now,
Hey, you're
Europe,
right.
on
Yeah.
the other hand, is recession city.
Yeah.
Now, how deep or how ugly the recession in Europe is going to get, who knows? But you do have a lot of unrest going on in Europe. You have the big farmer strike going on in Paris, Germany, Belgium, blocking roadways or whatever, protesting the EU's current farm guidance. But that just shows the rate of problems that the European Union has, and it's still going to have a hard time recovering, I think, going into 2024.
Yeah, I agree. I think Europe is, we have this argument every week about peak demand. We're not going to have it this week because we have it every week. But Europe is certainly, is running in treacle right now when it comes to to GDP growth and getting still out of a COVID sort of low interest rate environment and free money. It's definitely one to watch, and it's the resilience of the US economy that we said before, I think, is what has taken a lot of people by surprise. I agree with you. I'm kind of on the fence about interest rates, what it means. Is it as significant as people think? If they suddenly cut by 25 points, is it everyone piles out of money and back into oil or gold? I don't know. I don't think it carries that weight, to be honest, because I think people are looking beyond maybe 1, 2, or 3 rate cuts that will come. Some people think Q4, some people think it won't come until Q1
Well,
next year.
the thing with the rate cut is that it actually pulls money into bonds at the current interest rate environment. So you're more likely to own a T-bill as a risk-free return at 5%. If rates start getting cut, you start going to 475, 450,
Yeah,
lock in that 5% bond, and you're happy as a clam. You let that run all the way down till 2% yield, and you resell out at 2% yield. So it actually takes money out of a lot of at least my opinion, it takes money out of a lot of higher risk investments into the more secure investment because it's
yeah,
a free rate of return.
yeah. I agree.
Not
Well,
inflation adjusted, but just a free rate of return because of the stability of the T-bill.
yeah. Look, just before we wrap up, one thing we wouldn't be a TSB episode without liking, comment, subscribing, of course, but without talking about OPEC. There's a story this morning that I'm not too clued up on, Shock. It's something about Saudis have made a decision to
Not increase investment and increase their overall topside production level.
Right. Now, this is important. So it says Saudi decision to limit its oil output to 12 million barrels a day. I'm just reading something that our friend Amina Bakr, Energy Intelligence, wrote. State-controlled Saudi Aramco dropped a bombshell announcement on Tuesday, saying that it had received a directive to shelve plans of raising its oil production to 13 million barrels a day by 2027. Yeah,
That kind of goes against the OPEC statements that, oh, we need to see more investment to meet the growing energy demands of the world.
right.
Goes right in the face of that because I think, again, you said you didn't want to talk peak demand. I think that kind of points to peak demand because
Well,
if they're seeing that there's no need to invest in more production, that 12 million is just fine. They're not seeing the forward demand that their analytics show out of Vienna.
yeah, look, it certainly doesn't do my argument a great deal of good. I'm not going to lie. Thank you, Saudi. No, look, I mean, I think Aramco said they expect demand growth this year of about 1.5 million. OPEC think about 2.2. So that's the first kind of sort of fracture in thinking there. And look, look, there's many things to talk about. Long-term Vision 2030 the Saudis have got, does more oil fit that corporate responsibility investment people will make into the country? Discuss. Does it mean that oil demand has peaks and that it's not as great as was initially thought in 2020 when they announced they were going to go to 13 million barrels a day. Or the skeptic in me, who's right here, who's telling me maybe there's something else, Matt. Is it a way of spooking the market and thinking I'm going to go long back end curve, 25, Cal 25, because there's not going to be enough oil as promised in the market? Is it let's see what market reaction will be if we don't increase production and change policy on our oil output?
Well, you got to remember, there's other countries in the world that are increasing oil output at exponential rates. That despite Saudi going from 12 to 13, you've got Ghana, you've got, or sorry, Guinea, you've got Brazil, you've got the United States, you've got Canada. So you've got a lot of other places in the world that are not national in UAE and Iraq and potentially Libya and potentially Angola. A lot of places in the world that can increase oil production with investment that would flood the market with more crude. And so again, if you're in a peak demand environment, why would you spend capital to increase oil production when you can divert that capital to other items that you might want to invest in on a go-forward basis that have a better bang for your buck for your general population, as well as what you want to do as an ESG type response?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, I think that's a conversation that I think many people are pine on. It's a very interesting one. Is it a seismic shift in policy from Saudis? I don't think so. But if what they're doing is allowing other people to benefit from them not increasing production, I don't know how that sits within the walls of Vienna in OPEC. I don't know. No, we'll step back so you can increase because you're going to do it anyway. I'm just not sure on that chess move, if I'm honest.
Well, I will fall back to my position of peak oil demand, and they realize it, and
I
therefore
didn't want to talk about it this week.
do
Shut up.
something else. But hey, this can also be a debate that can be had at the International Energy Week in London,
Yes.
coming up the week of the 27th.
Yes.
So hope to see you all there in London. Myself and Matt will be around, and hopefully we can bind your ear and debate and discuss a lot of these different subjects and a lot of different topics, and see if we can come to a consensus.
Yes, and maybe share a hot-based beverage or two in the Shepherd's Market area of Mayfair.
Yes, that would
Right.
definitely be up for runs. So that's about all the time we have for this episode of the Smoking Barrel. We thank you very much. As Matthew said, click, like, and subscribe. A shout out to Irene for all of her help. Team strong, and we'll catch you all later.
Yeah.